Okay, my time says 8:34, and in this digital age, everybody seems to be on the same clock. So I'm going to start. Welcome. My name is Andy Back. I am the Planning and Development Services Manager for Washington County. This is the development forum that we do twice a year. First, I'm going to go over the purpose. So if we can show the slideshow here. Whoever is the great slideshow, here it comes. So briefly, it's virtual meeting. You've been in a lot of these. Let me just talk about the goals of the forum. I trust everyone can read here, but so it's primarily to share information of what's been going on the last 6 months and give you a summary, and also hear from our customers about what their needs are and sort of what's been going on. The last bullet to me is the most important one. It's to build relationships between our customers and staff, and just ensure that there's a dialogue that goes on. Sometimes when we're in the midst of the permitting process, things can get tense and people have different views of how things are going, but we think that the best way to help that process is to build these relationships outside of the actual process. So that to me is the main intent. Unfortunately, we're still meeting virtually, so we don't have the ability to grab a muffin and a cup of coffee and talk. But we do think that this is still a productive thing to do. So let me talk a little bit about the agenda today. That's my cue to bring up the agenda there. Perfect. So I am doing the welcome and overview right now. We're going to have a middle housing update from Teresa Cherniak. You can, just stay on that slide. Aaron Wardell and Stacy Shetler are going to talk two things transportation related. We're updating RNO 8695, which many of you have worked with, which is our Transportation Development Review rules, and also some related road standard changes that correspond to that. Derek Moon is here to talk about a few things that are going on in the world of building services, project docs and its status, view specs, which is a video inspection service that we've been slowly rolling out, and also Select Tech, which is a kind of a cool way to help with the inspection process. I'll give you an update on the current planning and building services staffing and workload, and also we're going to kick off an assessment of building and current planning. We've hired an outside consultant to help us with that, to help with some of the funding issues that we've had. So with that, I think I'm just going to turn it over to Teresa, and we'll move on with the program.
Good morning. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, it is kind of weird to not see everyone's faces, but looks like we have good attendance. We have 31 people, so good morning, everyone. I'm Teresa Cherniak, the Principal Community Planner. And the last time we were here to talk about House Bill 2001 and middle housing implementation was in April. So a lot has happened since then, and we'll give you an overview of that. Next slide, please. So I think everyone knows what House Bill 2001 is, but quick, brief overview. It was a bill that was passed in 2019 by the state legislature. The intent was to help increase housing supply by reducing barriers to certain housing types that can fit the needs of a wider range of households at different life stages and preferences. So the idea was to provide more housing options for more people. The bill requires Washington County and all other metro jurisdictions and other than large cities throughout the state to allow the middle housing types, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, by June of next year. This was middle housing, duplexes, quadplexes, triplexes were pretty common until the 1950s, but we haven't seen a lot built since then. And again, they can provide options for a lot of different people. Next slide, please. I'm sure many of you have seen this graphic. It just shows why it's called middle housing. The idea is it's somewhere between detached single family homes and more apartment buildings and condos. So it's duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. Those are the different middle housing types that are in the bill. Next slide, please. We may not have a lot of middle housing in Washington County, but we definitely do have some. And it's sprinkled throughout a lot of communities, some of our older communities, and then a lot of the newer areas as well are actually building it right now. So these pictures show some of the existing range of middle housing types, from an older duplex up at the top left to quadplex down kind of second from the bottom right. And sort of everything in between. What we don't have actually are cottage clusters, but otherwise I think pretty much we have representation of each type in the county right now. Next slide, please. Some highlights of the House Bill 2001 rules kind of in a nutshell. They do require us to allow a duplex on any lot that we allow single family dwellings right now. For the other types that were mentioned, we need to allow them in residential areas that allow detached homes, and there's some definitions as to what that means in areas. So part of what it allows us to do is potentially limit the middle housing in goal protected lands, and there are a number of statewide planning goals. For instance, goal 5, natural resources, goal 7. I'm trying to think of all the ones that are listed in the rules, but there are specific allowances for exceptions for these areas. And then we can limit middle housing in master planned communities in the areas there that haven't yet been developed. And the only master planned community in unincorporated Washington County is North Bethany. We need to allow the same approval process for middle housing as we do for detached housing in the same district. We can't have any more restrictive requirements such as lot width, setbacks, and heights. So the kind of dimensional standards must be no more restrictive than we have for detached single dwellings. And then we can establish some minimal design requirements, and those are established, the options are established in the rules. Next slide, please. So in Washington County, the applicable areas where we currently allow single detached dwellings are pretty much all of our residential districts. So from R5, R6, R9, R15, even in R24 and 25 plus, we do allow single detached. And so we will be allowing middle housing. In North Bethany, it just goes from R6 to R15. So those higher density in North Bethany don't allow single detached right now. Neighborhood mixed use is another one that's right now only in the Aloha Town Center. And then several of the transit-oriented residential districts. So from R9 to 12 to 18 to 24. And you can see in the map, most of the areas that are yellow to brown essentially are the areas. And then I believe the transit-oriented in this map are they're kind of lighter shades. There's a rose and robin's egg blue and that. So those are relatively small areas, but quite a bit of area in the county that will be subject to HB 2001. Next slide. This shows that a little more closely then. These are the, we actually did a map with all the lots that would be subject to it. So these are all the lots within those land use districts in the last slide, and excluding land that is not designated as residential, land that's not buildable. So we've taken out tracts and that sort of thing in here. And then this just shows the county's area. So cities are in gray, and outside the urban growth boundary, this actually doesn't apply. Next slide, please. Just to be very clear, and I think you all know that, while we'll be allowing middle housing, it doesn't mean we're requiring middle housing. And so that will still be up to individual builders and property owners, what they decide to do on their lots based on their own financial and other situations. We'll still be allowing detached single dwellings, but we may regulate the siting and design of middle housing through this. The bill also doesn't say that we can't do more. So we could allow middle housing in more locations beyond what is allowed by the bill. What we can't do, though, is discourage the development of middle housing through unreasonable costs or delay. And that, what exactly constitutes an unreasonable cost or delay, some of that is defined in the rules, and some of that probably will play out through lawsuits over time or negotiations with jurisdictions on what's reasonable and what's not. Next slide, please. So we will have to make a number of changes to our code to implement this bill. The bill and the rules, if you looked at them, are quite prescriptive, but they do leave some room for the county and other jurisdictions to make some local policy decisions. Some of those I've listed here. There is a model code, and so we can look at how much of that code to use versus developing our own regulations that meet the requirements of the rules. We can decide whether or not to limit middle housing in those statewide planning goal protected areas and in undeveloped portions of the master plan communities. And then we can look at how to address things like street frontage improvements and design standards. There is a bill that was also passed this past year that requires an expedited land division for middle housing. So there are some options there on how to address that. And then the specific requirements and allowances for some of the different types of middle housing. Next slide, please. So a lot of what I've talked about is kind of process and background. I wanted to give you some more substance, our early thoughts about how we might approach some of the places where we have options. These are early thoughts. They're not our specific recommendations. We have started talking with our planning commission about these, and there are briefing memos that talk about each of them. So if you are interested and want to get into more depth, please do look at our planning commission page, and the attachments to their agendas lays out a lot more detail. So some of the early thoughts are that we're looking at developing county-specific regulations based on the rules. Our code is quite particular and doesn't necessarily match up with how the model code is laid out, but we will be modeling from or borrowing from the model code. For portions of it, there are graphics in there. There are some suggested language sections that we probably will be borrowing from. We are looking to limit middle housing other than duplexes. So again, we have to treat duplexes the same as all single detached dwellings, but other than duplexes, we would be looking at limiting middle housing in significant natural resource areas and in the floodplain areas. We're looking at considering limits on middle housing other than duplexes in the undeveloped portions of North Bethany until after that initial development has happened. And there is quite a bit of information in a memo about exactly what areas that means. There's not a lot that has not yet been developed up there. We are looking at applying minimum lot sizes that are in the rules and the parking limits that are in the rules, and potentially allowing for parking reductions. There are some reductions for that we currently have in our code for proximity to transit, and then also for regulated affordable housing. And so we are at this point thinking that those reductions would be also allowed for middle housing. As far as design standards, our thought is that we would select a few design standards from the model code that are straightforward and practical and easy to use through a type 1 land use review process that would help middle housing be compatible with existing neighborhoods and increase the kind of pedestrian oriented feel of neighborhoods. And then finally, on street frontage improvements that we're considering requiring sidewalks and right-of-way dedication for single detached homes and middle housing. This is something we haven't yet fully sorted out. We haven't talked with the Planning Commission about yet, and that'll be, I think, mid-November when we talk with the Planning Commission about that. Next slide, please. And I think this may be my last slide, just to let you know what the process and timeline is. We did do an economic analysis, a market feasibility study that has folded into our research, analysis, and development of code concepts. And so right now we're in the phase of code writing. As I mentioned, though, we are doing a lot of briefing with our Planning Commission on different code concepts. We have done an online open house and survey, and there's a lot of information about that on our website. We do have other outreach that we are doing and plan to do. We are very interested in getting your feedback. And so if I can go to the next slide. Sorry, I thought I was done, but how you can be involved. So please do review materials on our website, including those briefing memos if you want to get into the detail of things. Let us know if you're interested in future outreach. We do have a mailing list, and we have regular updates that we're sending out to that list of folks, letting them know what's going on and giving access to the different materials that are out there and the different opportunities for involvement. So please sign up on our website to receive updates. Let us know if you're interested in a future developer focus group. We have held 1 or 2 of those, and we do intend to, in the next couple months, have more discussions with a lot more people, including builders and developers. We do want to hear your thoughts. So let us know if you're interested in that, and definitely participate in future outreach. So I'll stop there. And Andy, I don't know if you Or
Yeah, we
any questions or?
we have time for questions and answers at the end, but I do want you to I'm encouraging you to look at these names and Teresa's name specifically, and if you have questions, feel free to reach out directly to her too. Kind of have a packed program, but hopefully we can answer a few questions here at the end. Next up, we have Aaron Wardell and Stacy Shetler. We'll talk to you about some transportation items.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'm Stacy Shetler, the Washington County engineer, and as the slide gets pulled up here, going to be briefly talking about the transportation requirements and procedures for development and a project that we're undergoing to update that. Next slide, please. So the transportation requirements and procedures for development really defines the staff process for determining transportation system improvements required for development. It applies both to the urban and rural areas of unincorporated Washington County, as well as to county roads that are impacted within cities. And the current regulations were adopted in 1986. And although they've served the county well for the last 35 years, it's time for an update. And that work was included in long range planning's work program for 2021. And part of that update will consider the bicycle pedestrian infrastructure and how that relates to improvements that are done as part of the development. Next slide, please. So some more background on how this county's procedures and requirements compared to the cities. In general, we both use added vehicle trips from development to do the analysis based on different thresholds of that added traffic. We both don't really have explicit bicycle or pedestrian review criteria. We both tend to use the same guidelines and manuals and procedures that are common throughout the industry. And we both collect transportation development tax. Where we really differ is how we do our conditions and what that basis is. And cities focus on motor vehicle capacity improvements. And so those are performance requirements based on how much traffic will be on the system versus how much traffic the system can handle. So that's usually displayed in the ratio of volume to capacity. The county takes a little different approach and it's more safety based. So those added trips are looked at in comparison to warrants for things like traffic signals or left turn lanes. Next slide. So part of the update, the objectives really are to clarify the existing procedures. 35 years is a long time, and so state of the practice has changed in some areas. And so we want to reflect that in the update, as well as update definitions, and want to clarify certain requirements like requiring the cumulative traffic analysis for multiple phases of development. I think our code isn't really clear on that right now, but that will clarify that. We also want to expand the safety conversation to include cycling and pedestrian facilities, especially the gaps that are existing within the current county system. And then with those gaps, then encourage or require offsite development or encourage those gaps to be filled by development. Next slide. So this slide here has a table that shows at a very high level our proposed updates. The left-hand column is the trips per day. The middle column is the current process. And then the right column is the proposed update. And so three things I really want to highlight here on this slide is the 14 to 40 trips per day threshold. In the proposed update, that would be exempt from the transportation requirements procedures for development process. And really what we found over the last 35 years is that 40 trips, which is the equivalent of about 4 single family homes, really doesn't trigger much improvement with that level of development. And so we can streamline the process by not requiring the additional analysis. Now, it's important to note that the community development code requirements still apply. So The streets are still getting constructed, the sidewalks are still getting constructed, all those things are still happening as a baseline. The second thing to note on this table is in category B, the 200 to 500 trips per day. And in the proposed update, the safety analysis is being expanded to include bicycle and pedestrian, especially looking at the existing gaps in the system, and then also proportional mitigation measures that would be required by development. Then the third important thing to highlight here is in category C, the 500 plus trips. In the proposed update, there's an additional capacity assessment that would be required. And then any deficiency mitigations would then be optional. And the point of this optional condition really is that improvements can be transportation development creditable if they were conditioned as part of the development. And so these optional conditions can help both benefit the county, and then if the developer wants more transportation development credits off-site. Next slide. So we've talked to the different groups that are on this slide, as well as doing a board presentation for Board of County Commissioners. And go ahead and go to the next slide. And what we've heard from these groups is one, a desire for consistency among both the county and the city. I'll go to the next slide, please. We've also heard that that the document's old, it's not really accessible, 1986, the scanned copies. I've got an actual hard copy here somewhere, but you'll auction it up at the Christmas party this year, the highest bidder. But in general, it's tough to get that information. And the other concerns that we heard was that we don't want additional requirements or procedures, especially for smaller developments, make the process more onerous. But at the same time, we've heard that in general support for the bike pedestrian goals, filling those gaps, and then also a continued emphasis on the safety approach that we do take. Next slide. So next steps, we'll be taking the draft document back out to the groups on the list and probably a few others. And then from there, we'll go to the board probably in the spring of 2020 for board adoption. And with that, we'll move on to the next slide, and Aaron Wardell will talk a little bit about the road standards update.
Thanks, Stacy. My name is Aaron Wardell. I'm the Principal Transportation Planner. Next slide, please. So the objectives of the Complete Streets Design Update is to update our road design and construction standards and our transportation system plan policies to reflect kind of changing community expectations for what our roadway system needs to look like and the many different types of users who we should be accommodating. Generally, our update has focused on arterials and collectors in the urban area. Next slide. So there are two different documents that we will be proposing amendments to. The first is our transportation system plan. So the transportation system plan is an element of our comprehensive plan. It guides our 20-year vision of what our transportation system should be. Within the transportation system plan are policy goals, the right-of-way widths, and this is relevant, of course, for development because this table is used to determine how much right-of-way has to be dedicated, the number of lanes on roadway facilities, the functional classification of roadways, and then we have a number of different overlays depending on the context or the specific type of roadway. And just an example of one of those overlays is an enhanced major street bikeway, which means that this is a roadway that's been identified as needing a slightly higher level of accommodation for bicyclists. Next slide. Then there's the road design and construction standards. This is not a part of the comprehensive plan. It is the technical engineering design and construction requirements for road and bridge improvements. If the transportation system plan is guiding what the road should be, the road design and construction standards is guiding how you build that. So we have in there the cross sections of the various roadway types, the roadway element widths, so that means the lanes, the bike lanes, sidewalks, landscaping strips, those different pieces. We have the design and target speeds for roadways, and then things like curb design elements. Next slide. So for our proposed update, we are looking at adding context sensitivity to the types of roads. And so we would be thinking about different typologies depending on if an area is identified as a town center, if it's other urban, meaning within the urban growth boundary, but not a town center, or a rural type of a roadway. And within each of those area types, we would be proposing some variation of those design details. So you may have a different bicycle facility option, different sidewalk widths, different design or target speeds. So for example, in a town center, the design target speed may be slower, reflecting that we'd expect to have more pedestrians in those areas. We could have more variation in on-street parking options than we have now, and then some variation in lane widths, again, interfacing with the design and target speeds. Next slide. So this is an example of what an arterial cross-section and design elements could look like after this update. We're not necessarily changing the amount of right-of-way we need. That's still something that we want to be looking at, but we're more thinking about what we can do within that right-of-way. And so what this cross-section is reflecting is, compared to our current standards, narrower travel lanes, narrower turn lanes, but a higher level of protection through the on-street buffer for bike lanes, and then a wider sidewalk to possibly accommodate slower moving cyclists or to accommodate more pedestrian traffic. So this slide is showing urban on the right, and then a rural or interim cross-section on the left. And then some of the design details are different in the table below. Next slide. So this is similar. It's showing what a collector would look like rather than an arterial. We are proposing as a base standard, essentially the same level of protection for bicyclists and pedestrians in our base urban standard, which would be the on-street buffered bike lane for bicycles and an 8-foot standard sidewalk. But as a collector facility rather than an arterial, the design speeds would be lower, and we could allow for on-street parking in some particular contexts. Next slide. So the other important piece of this project is to incorporate some standard alternative designs for higher levels, even higher levels of protection for bicyclists and pedestrians. This is something that comes up more on the capital project side when we are in the process of designing a project that's, say, funded by the MISTIP program, our Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program. Our capital projects designers have a whole universe of options for how you can provide that higher level of protection. And so we were interested in developing kind of the standard set of what they would want to choose from, depending on the community desires in that particular area for that specific project. And so this slide is just showing what some of those standard options could look like. And again, we're trying to work with what we know is a limited amount of right-of-way. And so thinking about how these elements can flex and can fit into that space. Next slide. So our next steps for this are to prepare updates to the transportation system plan as a proposed ordinance to the board early next year. And then Stacy's team is working on the update to the road design and construction standards document, also to bring forward to the board probably more mid next year. And that is it for our slides.
Okay, thank you, Stacy and Aaron. And again, we may have time at the end for specific questions, or I would encourage folks just to reach out specifically to Aaron and Stacy if you have questions. So next, it's the Derek Moon Show. So take it away, Derek.
All right, good morning. My name is Derek Moon. I'm the Building Services Supervisor for Washington County. I am not here to talk about any new rules, regulations, or requirements. Everything I'm discussing is going to be dealing with improving the customer service experience for all of our customers and our applicants. So I'm going to be talking about project docs, view specs, our video inspection service, and selects text. I will start with select text because it's the simplest to explain. It simply provides another channel for our contractors and our homeowners to access their permit and complete transactions kind of when and where they want to. Right now, you have to call in to set up an inspection or log into our IVR service to set up and schedule an inspection. Right now with Select Text, which is active, you're allowed to simply text in a phone number to schedule, cancel, reschedule, or get the results of an inspection. It's a really simple process to do. Once you call in the number, you put in your inspection code, and the interactive prompts will carry you through the whole process. So we're really proud of this new system. Heard lots of positive things back from lots of contractors about not having to log around a computer with them, and makes your lives just so much easier with being able just to text in an inspection. The next thing I want to talk about is View Specs. View Specs is our video inspection service. At the last development forum meeting, there was a demonstration of how it's used, about taking over using the cameras on your phones to be able to do it, kind of like doing a FaceTime, but with more interactive tools involved. Currently, right now, it's being used mostly by our electrical and plumbing inspectors. One of the common uses is for underground piping and underground wiring, where the contractor has a ditch dug and they have the pipe or wire in the ditch, and they use a tape measure and they walk it along the ditch line, showing the depth is correct. That is one of the most common ways it's being used now. Another one is for re-inspections. When I mean re-inspections, I'm talking about simple inspections in which maybe there was a hanger that was missed or a hold down that was placed in the wrong location. They're able to do a video inspection and show us where it has been placed. And that allows us not to have to come out to the site. So this is a tool that helps us some, but really helps the contractor as well. One thing I want to talk about with video inspections or our VSPIC service is the future. I want to emphasize by saying this is the future. This is not right now. We don't know a timeline for when this is going to be moving forward. But we're looking at the possibility of allowing the contractor, for some inspection types, to upload video links of what they've done into our permit system. This would allow the contractor to record a video, upload it into the permit so that we can review it at a different time. So if, for example, if we have a scheduled inspection for today and I can't make it because I'm in this meeting, I could upload the video in there, then the inspector could come back and look at it and approve that video. Like I said, this is more complicated than we thought it was going to be, but we're working on it, and we're hoping to have some more information soon in the future. I'm not going to say near future, I'm going to say distant future, but I'm going to say in the future. The last thing I want to discuss real quick, probably won't be super fast, but I'm going to try to condense it because this is just me talking with no slides because this is a new one. PDocs is our electronic plan review software that we've been using now for over 2 years. The last time I was at the development forum, I discussed it, gave a demonstration, showed it how it worked. Well, usually with the county, we do not upgrade software easily or often because it's expensive. But this Project Docs upgrade that came out, and it helps the user experience so much more. It creates an ease of use for them that we thought was important to purchase and push out to everyone here. So basically, we'll be the first one in the metropolitan area that will be pushing out the Project Docs 9.2 upgrade. Lots of jurisdictions have 9, we'll be pushing out 9.2 because it gives us a lot more flexibility. Currently with Project Docs, the approved browser that you need to use is Internet Explorer. As you all know, Internet Explorer is going away. So now they're trying to use Microsoft Edge, and there are some compatibility issues with it currently from all of our testing. That's one of the reasons we went to 9.2, because with this new system, you're able to use any browser you would like without any complications. So people that prefer Apple products, great, Safari will work with it. People that prefer Firefox or Google Chrome, this system will work with it. So that's the #1 customer experience that's been improved with PDocs. The next portion is for anyone that's used our system before, it's uploading files. One of our goals was to decrease the clicks and complications for the customer. And with 9.2, we're able to do that. In the past, you would get an email saying, you're welcome to the project. Then you get another email that says, great, I need you to go log into Project Docs and start your review process. So then you have to go into Project Docs, type in your password and everything, then go into the system, click the drawings page and start uploading files and folders, pages, excuse me, and documents. With the upgrade, that's no longer required. So when you get that first email coming into you, that email will include the e-form. On the e-form itself, you will be able to upload all your documents and drawings right there in the e-form. Another benefit of this e-form is versioning is a way when we're sending out corrections or a numbering sequence that's used for it. This system will automatically see if there's any corrections that need to be made on the versioning or numbering system when you're trying to upload your plans and documents. So if there's a double number, the e-form will pick it up. And these things are just makes it so much simpler for you as the applicant, because that's one of the most common errors that we do in our pre-screen is that the numbering sequences are incorrect. So we send it back to you, which eats up time. And time is the most valuable assets for the contractors, the people trying to do all this work. So we take that one correction completely out of the system because it's done automatically through versioning in the system. Another thing that we've heard lots of complaints about that we will be correcting is the ability to allow the customer to have multiple people assigned to one permit. So the best way to do this is a simple example, but if you're an architect and you have an engineer working on your project, generally speaking, the architect was the applicant, the person of record. So all communication went through that one person. With this upgrade, we're allowing multiple people to be associated with the project. They may have viewer rights only, in which they can view any comments that are seen, or they may be able to be interactive with the project. Previously, the architect would have to go to reports, download the corrections or items that needed to be addressed, send that item to the engineer. The engineer would reply to the item, send it back to the architect, and the architect would have to upload those features into the PDOC's e-form. Now they're allowed to have multiple people looking at it, and the engineer would be able to get the e-form himself, put in his comments, and he can send it in instead of having to go through that one architect all the time. So this is a big, big deal and a big change for us that it will give more, make it a lot more, it'll improve the customer experience greatly and the whole review process with PDOCs. One other quick thing I want to talk about with PDOCs is that we will be incorporating ACA into PDOCs as well. ACA is the Excellus Citizen Access Portal. In this portal, you'll be able to see what is happening in all your PDOCs projects. You'll be able, it'll list them out and tell you what stage they're at in our PDOCs review process, which helps for transparency. Here again, you don't want to have to go to ACA, then PDOCs, and to find another browser to find out what's going on. So in one spot, currently right now, with the upgrade, you'll be able to see what all your projects are doing. The one other thing I should tell you is that we're in the middle of testing for this. We're hoping to go live the first half of December with the 9.2. If anyone would like to volunteer to help us with some of the testing on the applicant side, feel free to contact me. All my information is in the agenda. With that, I think I am done.
Okay, thanks, Derek. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is good, which will give us more time at the end. So why don't we jump into the Andy Back presentation here. So before focusing on these numbers, I just want to tell you that the county, specifically LUT, has hired a consultant to do an assessment of current planning and building. As you know, we're a county, not a city, and so that means we function a little bit differently. Both building and current planning are almost entirely fee supportive, which is different than most of the cities. And because of that, we have more variation in terms of our budgets when things slow down. So we're sort of the impact of a pandemic can be more severe on us than maybe other places in terms of revenue, just because we're so dependent on permit fees. So another thing that's going on that most of you are aware, Washington County historically has been sort of the land of the big subdivisions. So for the past 30, 40 years, a lot of really big subdivisions have come in the unincorporated parts of the county. And that's been kind of our bread and butter, if you will. So as North Bethany gets built out along with Bonnie Slope, there are few instances of large subdivisions and the ability to kind of start from scratch on bare ground. So while unless annexations take off like crazy, we still anticipate activity in the county, but it's largely going to be infill and much smaller projects. So I think our just basic business model is going to have to change. So as part of doing this, we wanted to, bring in sort of an objective third party to look at what we're doing and compare us to other jurisdictions and give us some insight on the customer experience and also sort of the staff experience in working, because frankly, the morale hasn't been wonderful over the past couple of years, as it has. It's the same experience as a lot of other places as we've been kind of going through this transition. So with that, before jumping into this slide, just want to mention generally what's happening on the staff front in both current planning and building in terms of the last time we met. So in the last time we met, we've lost 3 people in both current planning and in building. So our number of people continue to go down, so that we haven't had to lay anybody off. Those have been sort of voluntary moves, but we haven't replaced them rapidly. We are at the point now where when people leave, we are hiring new people, but that process takes a while. And as you know, getting people up to speed takes a while too. So I just want to mention one person specifically, Ryan Markward, who is one of the lead urban planners in current planning, left recently. Also, while she's still here, Jenny Bond, who's the senior rural planner, is retiring in December. So we are moving to replace both of them, but again, it's going to take time. And on the building side, we have lost a couple of admin people, permit techs, and inspectors over the past 6 months. So let me just generally talk about this slide. It just kind of reflects where we are. If you look at 27-18 versus 21-22, we had 19.5 people working in current planning. Now we're down to a little bit more than 11. So certainly the level of activity is down, but we do have almost 70,000 lots in unincorporated Washington County. And so even if there's no actual fee revenue coming in, we still get a ton of inquiries from people. So that's kind of the problem, that the permit activity is still there. But the questions are really just a function of how many lots we have, and that really hasn't changed. Next slide. Ding, ding. So here you see the same thing in building. And I just want to mention the budget versus the actual. We have the ability to hire more people without getting having to go back to the board, but if we don't have the money, we don't do that. So the word budgeted actually should be budgeted, just proving that we're human here. But you can kind of see the changes since 2018, 2019 versus now. So we're down about 8 people. And as you know, a lot of times responding to upticks in activity is we move slowly hiring people. It takes time to get them up to speed. So part of the reason of doing this assessment is to try to get at this variability that we've kind of struggled through, and as our customers, I know you've experienced it too. Next slide. So this just kind of talks about what's been going on in our budget. As you can see, the blue is money we've been bringing in, and the orange is what we've been spending. So we have made a lot of changes over the last year to try to curb expenditures. So our expenditures are down, and that's primarily staff costs. So as people have left, we haven't replaced them. But we're kind of at that point where we just can't really do that anymore and function at an acceptable level. But the revenue side clearly isn't where it was in 15, 16. So this is one of the primary things that we're going to get at in the assessment is see if there's other revenues out there. And again, we don't have a big surplus of general fund revenue coming in to help solve this problem, although there has been a 1-year sort of subsidy from the board to help out current planning and building for this fiscal year. So we're going to hopefully, it's not going to get us to the point where we have to do anything drastic. So we've certainly appreciated that from the board. Next slide. This kind of shows the same trend in building that you see in current planning, that we are spending more than the money we're taking in. What's not shown in here is, and in both current planning, we did have we had a building and current planning kind of surplus of money that we're spending down. So that has helped, but we're getting to the point where if that continues over the long run, we're going to have to make some significant changes. Ding, next slide. So I know you're always interested in how long it takes to do things. So we figured we would show these, and these are our timelines. They don't necessarily reflect the total time that it takes to get a permit because, as mentioned earlier, it's partnership. So this is the time it takes for us to do our work on average for different things. But if we have comments and we send it back to the applicant, if the applicant takes 1 day, things move faster. If they take 3 months responding to those questions, well, that slows things down. So we can only sort of be responsible for when the ball's in our court, so to speak. So here's an overview of the different timelines that we've been experiencing. Ding. And I just want to talk briefly about current planning and their performance measure. we focus on once an application is complete, meeting the statutory timelines. So we still have been pretty good about meeting all those deadlines. So that's clearly the focus of our activity. We know time, maybe getting an application in and processing an application prior to it being complete. Those times may have increased a little bit over the last couple of years, but really our focus is once an application is complete, making sure that we meet these timelines and current planning. Ding, next slide. So let me talk a little bit more why I shared all that preliminary information was to get to this slide. So we've hired a consultant, they're called Synergy Resources Group. They're starting work over the next couple of weeks. And this is just kind of a broad scope of work, but really the work that they're going to be doing between November and February is a lot of engagement. They will be reaching out to some developers, and clearly this question of how we structure our work and how we fund it and all those things, I'd certainly welcome any thoughts you might have on that. So the first part is sort of gathering data and try to understand where we're at. And then in February through June, the focus will be on developing different scenarios of different funding and service delivery models, and ultimately have some recommendations that we can take forward to the board that will hopefully correspond with budget decisions for next fiscal year. Again, I think we're okay this fiscal year in terms of where we're at, because we did get this one-time subsidy from the board and the general fund for both building and current planning. Ding, next slide if there is one. I don't think there is one. So that ends that presentation. We're done a little bit early, which is good. So I think we're at the point where we could entertain questions from folks on any topic. So I'd encourage the Teresa's, Stacy, Aaron's, and Derek's of the world to kind of pop back on here, because some of the questions may be thrown your way.
If you would like to ask a question and you press the raise your hand feature, we'll be able to unmute you in the order that you raise your hands. David, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi there. I think this question, I've got a mask on, so sorry if it's a little muffled. Hopefully you can hear me. My question is for Aaron Wardell, and it has to do specifically with some of the road planning relative to what you just presented, which was considerations of the differentiation of arterial and collector, and then as they interface with townscape and urban cityscape elements where there's much greater density of pedestrian and bicycle multimodal transportation. And this is kind of continuing to be more and more of an issue as a sort of urban county interface occurs with the road systems that we have. And I was looking closely at all the slides and the sections and whatnot, and they look great, and they're all definitely state of the art in terms of design sensibility. But one thing that wasn't clear to me was the question of distance between intersections in terms of the network when it comes to multimodal, especially pedestrian, block sizes, distance between crossings, distance between signalized intersections. I know that has a safety relevance as well. Aaron, can you give us some thoughts as you're working through that work on that point, in addition to the street sections that you showed?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We have heard that from some of the other outreach we've done, is that thinking about the crossings of streets is really important. And we haven't had a chance to dig into that so much. As you know, when we're doing these designs, it's the easy part is the cross section, right? Because it's static and it's in the middle. It's where things get really complicated when we get to needing to manage crossings and how we move our multimodal treatments through those crossings and how often we need to have those crossings. And so I think there's more work to be done there, and hopefully we'll have an update on that.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, if there aren't any more questions, we certainly can leave early. I know you all have busy days, and our next meeting is April 28th of 2022. So go ahead and mark your calendars for that. And I appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time, hopefully. And feel free to reach out to any staff on any of these issues. Thank you.